Reddit, I need to get this off my chest. This will be a very, very long story. Not because there are many dramatic twists, but because a collapse of this magnitude doesn't happen in an instant. It's woven from thousands of almost invisible threads of indifference, unspoken words, and silent compromises that eventually intertwine into a shroud covering all life. I won't fit it into one post, and honestly, I'm not even sure I can convey the whole gamut of feelings, or rather, the agonizing lack thereof, that filled my life all those years. But I'll try. My name is Daniel. I'm 42 now, and I've been divorced for 3 years. My ex-wife's name is Erin. We were both 39 when we divorced. We lived together for 12 years, 9 of them officially married. I'll start at the very beginning because it's important. Important to understand where it all started, to see how imperceptibly one can take a wrong turn and end up trapped in a cage built by one's own hands. We met in New York in 2008. I was 26, she was 25. I worked as a financial analyst at a large investment firm. Erin was an editor at a prestigious but small publishing house specializing in popular science literature. We met at a mutual friend's party, Michael's. I remember standing by the improvised bar, mixing myself some ridiculous cocktail, when I heard a clear, calm voice behind me discussing Cormac McCarthy's latest novel. The voice belonged to her. I turned around, and I saw her. Erin wasn't a woman who struck you down with sexuality or flashy beauty. Her beauty was different, classical, severe, almost aristocratic. A high forehead, a straight nose, light brown eyes that looked at the world with attentive, slightly detached clarity. Dark hair was pulled back into a neat bun. She was dressed simply, dark trousers, a white blouse, no jewelry except for thin silver earrings. She was talking to Michael's friend, and her arguments were as precise and polished as her appearance. I was hooked. Not by a bolt of lightning, but by a quiet, persistent call. I joined the conversation. We started talking about literature, movies, contemporary art. It turned out our tastes were strikingly similar. We both adored Coen brothers films and early Woody Allen, preferred art house cinema to Hollywood blockbusters, equally admired Edward Hopper's work, and were skeptical of new trends in painting. We both loved Japanese cuisine for its minimalism and Italian for its soulfulness. We both believed the best vacation was a long walk through the city with interesting conversation, not a noisy party. It felt like a miracle. As if I had found a person who spoke my language. Not just the language of words, but the language of associations, values, perception of the world. We talked all evening, forgetting about the other guests. When I walked her to a taxi, she smiled at me, restrained but sincere, and said, "It was very nice arguing with you, Daniel. I hope we continue." We continued. Our courtship was as perfect as our first meeting. We went to quiet restaurants where you could talk, not shout. We spent hours wandering through museums, sharing impressions. We gave each other books, which immediately became topics for new long discussions. Sex, when it happened, 2 months after we met, was beautiful. Not wild and passionate, but deep, mutual, filled with respect and tenderness. We seemed to fit each other perfectly in every way. Our families and friends were delighted. My parents, school teachers from a quiet town in Ohio, were charmed by Erin's elegance and intellect. Her parents, successful partners at a law firm in Connecticut, saw me as a promising and balanced young man. Our social circles intertwined, and we quickly became the couple held up as an example. Look at Daniel and Erin. They have such mature, meaningful relationships. No drama. After 3 years, I proposed. It wasn't an impulse of mad passion. It was a calm, deep conviction that this was the next logical and right step. I rented a cabin in the Catskills for a weekend. In the evening, as we sat on the porch with a glass of wine, watching the sunset, I took out the ring. I didn't get down on one knee. That would have seemed theatrical to us both. I simply said, "Erin, I think we should spend the rest of our lives together. What do you think?" She looked at the ring, then at me. That same restrained, warm smile bloomed on her face. "Yes, Daniel," she replied. "I think so too. It's a reasonable decision." We hugged. There was a feeling of deep satisfaction, confidence. We were on the same wavelength. The wedding was beautiful. Not huge, but meticulously planned. The ceremony was in a small historic mansion near New York. Only the closest were there. No drama, no tears, except for tears of emotion from our mothers. The toasts were intelligent and brief. Everything went exactly as we had planned. Perfectly. We honeymooned in Tuscany. 2 weeks of wandering through wineries, medieval towns, long candlelit dinners. We read poetry aloud to each other, argued about Renaissance architecture, held hands in silence watching sunsets. It was, without exaggeration, the happiest period in our relationship. The peak, and then began the long, gentle descent. Returning, we bought an apartment in Brooklyn. A spacious 2-bedroom with a view of Manhattan. The process of buying and furnishing was a new joint project for us, and we approached it with our usual enthusiasm and rationalism. We made spreadsheets with the pros and cons of different neighborhoods, calculated the budget down to the last cent, calmly and without emotion discussed who needed which room for a study. We chose every detail of the interior together, from the wall color, a calm gray-green, to the refrigerator model. Everything was a joint decision, all compromises found easily and painlessly. Our home became a reflection of us, flawless, stylish, harmonious, and predictable. The first 2 years of living together seemed like a natural continuation of our dating, just with a shared budget and a mortgage. We both worked a lot, building our careers. In the mornings, we drank coffee together, reading the fresh press. In the evenings, if we both got home on time, we cooked dinner together. She was in charge of appetizers and salads. I took the main course. Then we might watch a film from our endless to-watch list, discuss it, read, or just work in our respective studies. On weekends, brunches with friends, exhibitions, sometimes trips out of town. Sex happened once or twice a week, always by mutual, almost unspoken consent. It was pleasant, gentle, predictable. We fell asleep almost simultaneously, in the same bed, often touching feet. From the outside, it looked like a model marriage of two modern, successful, intelligent people. But it was precisely then, in this very idyll, that I began to notice the first, microscopic cracks. Or rather, not cracks, but the absence of something. Like a quiet, barely perceptible hum only audible in complete silence. Silence. That's where it all began. Before, our silence had been full. In a museum, looking at the same painting, we would exchange understanding glances, and the silence between us vibrated with shared thoughts. In the car during a long drive, the silence was peaceful, contemplative. Now, the silence during dinner or while watching a film together became different. It became heavy, awkward. It lacked that resonance. We would express our opinions about the film, but they sounded like rehearsed reviews. We discussed the events of the day, but it was like exchanging weather reports. The budget was approved at the meeting. We got a new editor-in-chief at the publishing house. That thing from before was gone. You know, today I saw an old man on the street who, or, a strange thought occurred to me today. I was the first to try to break through this growing wall. I started sharing small, insignificant but personal observations, impressions from an article I'd read not for work, a funny story from childhood. Erin listened politely, nodded, sometimes asked a clarifying question. But there was no sincere interest in her eyes, no spark of shared engagement. Her responses were correct but stopped the conversation from developing further. Interesting, she would say. Or, yes, that happens. And the conversation would die. I chalked it up to fatigue. To us both being overloaded with work. To everyday life leaving no room for lofty matters. I tried to organize something like our old, intellectual evenings. I suggested choosing a topic once a week, like the future of urbanism, or the ethics of artificial intelligence, and discussing it over a glass of wine. Erin agreed. The first couple of times it even remotely resembled the old days. But soon it turned into another item on the schedule, a routine. Our discussions began to resemble not a lively debate but the reading of pre-prepared theses. The unpredictability, the excitement, the joy of an unexpected turn in a partner's thought, it was gone. I felt an invisible glass partition slowly but surely growing between us. I could see her, hear her, but couldn't touch her. Couldn't reach that girl who once argued about postmodernism with shining eyes. At the same time, I began to notice certain traits in Erin that had once seemed like cute quirks but now took on a new, alarming meaning. She had a scheduled and verified timetable for everything. Not just work, but leisure too. Reading fiction. Exactly from 9 o'clock to 10 p.m. before bed. Grocery shopping, Saturday, 10 a.m. Laundry, Sunday. Deviations from the schedule caused her mild, almost imperceptible irritation. If I suggested going to the movies spontaneously on a Wednesday evening, she would look at me with slight bewilderment. But yoga class is scheduled for tonight. And we didn't plan for this expense. Her world was structured like a closet with perfectly folded laundry. Any attempt by me to pull one thing out and throw it on a chair disrupted the harmony. Another thing. Absolute, icy rationality in any, even the most emotional, situation. Once, I had a terrible conflict at work with one of my bosses, which jeopardized my project. I came home agitated, hurt, I needed to vent, to get support. I laid it all out for her. She listened without interrupting, then said, "Daniel, from an emotional standpoint, I understand your distress. However, let's analyze the situation structurally. First, what objective evidence do you have of his bias? Second, which points of your contract or job description did he violate? Third, what are your further strategic steps? Resolve the conflict, transfer to another department, or begin a job search." She said this calmly, kindly. She was sincerely trying to help. But her help was like that of a high-class management consultant, not a wife support. I didn't need strategies, I needed a simple, "What an asshole. Tell me more, I feel for you." But such words never left her lips. Her language contained no, unproductive, emotional vocabulary. I fell silent, thanked her for the analysis, drank whiskey alone in the kitchen, feeling even lonelier than before the conversation. It was around then that we started thinking about children. We were nearing 30, careers were more or less established, the apartment was bought. Everything seemed ready. We discussed it, as usual, over dinner. Biologically and logically, the optimal time for the first child is within the next 2 to 3 years, Erin said. I agree, I nodded. We're financially ready. And psychologically, I think so too. Alright, then let's start trying in January. Before that, I'll have a full medical checkup, and you should too. We need to minimize risks. And so, starting in January, our intimate life turned from a rare but pleasant ritual into a planned conception operation. A calendar with marked ovulation days appeared on the refrigerator. Sex became goal-oriented, devoid of spontaneity and, gradually, any passion. It was like performing an important but boring task. Today is a favorable day, Erin would say, and it sounded like the command, forward. I felt not like a husband but like biological material. But again, I blamed myself. We want a child, isn't that more important than some momentary feelings? Months passed, but pregnancy didn't happen. Doctor visits began, tests, exams, ultrasounds. Our marriage fully immersed itself in medical terminology. We talked about hormones, cycles, tubal patency, sperm motility. Erin started a special notebook where she meticulously entered all data. Basal temperature, test results, dates and doses of medications. A problem was discovered. With me, the diagnosis sounded like a sentence. Oligosthenospermia, low sperm count and low motility. I was crushed. I felt inadequate, guilty, broken. That evening, when we got the results, I sat in the kitchen, staring at the wall, unable to utter a word. Shame and despair were raging inside me. Erin came over, sat down next to me, put her hand on mine. Her touch was cool. "Daniel, there's no need to dramatize," she said in her clear, calm voice. "This isn't a catastrophe. It's a medical fact. We have options. We can consider ICSI or IVF procedures. Success rates, according to recent studies, are between 30 to 40% per cycle for your age group. We just need to make a plan and follow it." I looked up at her. I expected tears, sympathy, an embrace, some words that would lift this crushing weight of guilt. I got a business plan. There was no judgment in her eyes, but there was also none of that human co-suffering. There was only focused determination to solve the next task. "Do you even understand what I'm feeling right now?" I asked quietly. She paused, her eyebrows slightly furrowed as if solving a complex equation. "Guilt and inadequacy, I presume. But these emotions are unproductive, Daniel. They won't improve sperm quality. It's more logical to direct energy towards studying the issue and choosing a clinic." At that moment, the glass partition between us turned into a concrete wall. I was on one side with my lump of pain and shame in my throat. She was on the other, with her notebook, pen, and statistical data. And there was no bridge to cross to each other. Not even an understanding that such a bridge was needed. We began the long, exhausting, incredibly expensive journey of IVF. IVF became for our marriage what a long siege is for a city. It exhausts all resources, exposes all weak points, turns life into one big anticipation of an assault that may never come. The procedure is a hellish conveyor belt. Hormonal injections for Erin, which she gave herself with icy calm, as if brushing her teeth, regular clinic visits for retrievals and transfers, endless tests, waiting, hope, more waiting. Financially, we were draining the savings meant for a bigger house and the children's future. Emotionally, I was at zero. Erin seemed made of granite. She endured all physical discomfort and pain without a single complaint. She studied protocols, compared statistics from different clinics, communicated on forums, searching for optimal strategies. Our conversations narrowed to discussing medical details. Estradiol rose to 3,500, that's a good indicator. The endometrium was 11 millimeters today, perfect for transfer. We slept in the same bed, but an invisible volume of medical encyclopedia lay between us. I tried to support her somehow, say something warm, hug her. She tolerated my embraces, but as if paying tribute to a ritual. Her thoughts were there, in the lab where our cells were being combined. The first attempt failed, a negative test. I was devastated. Erin, coming out of the bathroom with the test in her hand, just sighed. Statistically, the first attempt is rarely successful. We need to analyze what can be improved in the next cycle. I already have a few assumptions. Second attempt. Failure again. This time I saw her hand tremble as she placed the test on the table. But only for a second. She straightened up. We are moving to consider the donor sperm option. I've studied sperm banks. The selection criteria are as follows. I couldn't take it anymore. Erin, I yelled, and my voice sounded hoarse and unfamiliar in our quiet, flawless living room. Enough. Enough with the criteria, statistics, and plans. Our dream just died. For the second time. I'm in pain. I'm in goddamn pain, understand? And I think you are too. So let yourself feel it. Allow yourself to be a human, not a problem-solving machine. She looked at me with wide eyes. There was no fear in them, but pure, unadulterated bewilderment. As if I had started speaking gibberish. What does this hysterics give you, Daniel? She asked calmly. Pain won't implant the embryo. Tears won't increase the chances. We need to think rationally. I don't want to think rationally. I growled, feeling tears welling up. They were tears of fury, helplessness, and that very loneliness accumulated over the years. I want to cry. I want to scream. I want you to scream with me. Because this is awful. Because we're trying our hardest, and nothing works. And it's not fair. Fairness is a subjective concept, she said, still calm. There are no guarantees in the world. Only probabilities. And our task is to increase them. Hysterics do not increase probability. I realized we were speaking different languages. Not just using different words. We existed in different universes. In my universe, there was pain, despair, a need for sympathy, for shared grieving. In her universe, there were variables, algorithms, strategies, and the search for optimal solutions. And these universes did not communicate. I walked out of the apartment, slamming the door. Wandered around nighttime Brooklyn for several hours. When I returned, only the light in her study was on. She was at the computer, studying sperm donor profiles. I walked past without a word. We made a third attempt. With donor material. Erin insisted. I agreed because I saw no other way out and because I felt I owed it to her, due to my inadequacy. It failed again. This time, after getting the news, we just sat silently in the kitchen. I felt something inside me finally break and go out. Not just hope for a child. Something bigger. The financial reserve is 70% depleted. Erin broke the silence. Her voice sounded tired but still clear. The statistical probability of success with a fourth attempt at our age and with our history drops below 15%. It's logical to suspend procedures indefinitely. Perhaps consider adoption in a few years, once we restore the financial cushion. I looked at her beautiful, intelligent, infinitely distant face. Erin, I said quietly. What are we going to do about what's happening between us? She looked at me with that same bewilderment. What do you mean, us? Our marriage. We're not a couple anymore. We're co-authors of a failed project. She was silent, digesting my words. We have disagreements regarding emotional reactions, yes, she finally said. But that doesn't make our marriage a failure. We are still compatible in the main areas: household, finances, intellectual interests, life goals. What life goals? I asked with a bitter smirk. Our goal was a child. It's not achieved. What's next? Pay the mortgage until retirement and go to Tuscany once a year until we get bored? That's a stable and predictable life, Daniel. Many people dream of that. I didn't dream of that, it burst out of me. I dreamed of life. Real life. Where there's room not just for schedules but for madness. Where you can make mistakes, cry, laugh until you cry. Where we're a team not just against external problems but for something good inside. For warmth, for laughter, for all that stuff you can't describe in an Excel spreadsheet. She leaned back in her chair, studying me with a look as if I were a rare, incomprehensible exhibit. You're idealizing, Daniel. Real life consists of routine and planning. Romance and madness, as you call it, are nothing more than hormonal surges that cannot be the foundation for a long-term partnership. What can be the foundation, in your opinion? I asked, almost without hope for understanding. Mutual respect, shared values, rational division of responsibilities, logical support, what we have. But it's not enough, I almost shouted. Not enough for what? Her question hung in the air, and I couldn't find an answer. For happiness would have sounded banal and unscientific in her coordinate system. To feel alive would have been perceived as a metaphor without practical meaning. We fell silent. The war was lost because it was fought on incompatible battlefields. It was after this conversation, or rather after this dialogue of the deaf, that I first seriously thought about divorce. Not as an emotional reaction, but as a cold, terrifying conclusion. Aaron and I were two different species that, by an evolutionary mistake, ended up in the same enclosure. We didn't harm each other. We were just slowly dying from a lack of the air each of us needed to breathe. For me, the air of emotions, spontaneity, deep empathy. For her, the air of order, predictability, rational control. And there was no one to blame. There was only a monstrous, exhausting incompatibility. The last year of our marriage was like living in a beautifully furnished mausoleum. We formally lived together, but our lives had finally diverged into parallel orbits. We became polite roommates who coordinated schedules for using the kitchen and bathroom. I stayed at work later and later, and if I came home on time, I shut myself in my study. I began seeking salvation outside. I joined a hiking club. On weekends, I went off with a group of other city dwellers, thirsty for some outlet for their feelings, to the mountains or forests. There, by the campfire, among strangers, I felt more alive and connected than in my apartment with my wife. I could laugh at stupid jokes, share simple impressions of the landscape's beauty, and be listened to and understood. It was a bitter medicine. Erin, in turn, threw herself completely into work. She got promoted to senior editor of her division. Her business trips became more frequent and longer. When she was home, she was a physically present ghost, moving quietly through the apartment, answering work calls, working at her computer until late. We exchanged brief phrases, like colleagues at the water cooler. Pass the salt, please. The plumber is coming tomorrow, I'll be late. Sex, of course, ceased entirely. Even the thought of it seemed absurd. We slept in the same bed, separated by a space that felt wider than the Atlantic Ocean. Sometimes at night I'd wake up and look at her profile in the light of street lamps filtering through the blinds. I tried to see in her the girl who once argued about books. But I saw only a familiar, beautiful, yet completely closed-off silhouette. We stopped even pretending to go out together. Our mutual friends, seeing this, stopped inviting us as a couple. First it was awkward, then it became the norm. Once, on one of the rare Saturdays when we were both home, I asked for her help. I needed to make an important presentation for a potential investor. I knew Erin was a genius at structure and wording. Of course, she said. Send me the draft, I'll review it from the perspective of narrative logic and argument persuasiveness. I sent it. In the draft, besides numbers and charts, I tried to add a little soul, a short metaphorical story at the beginning, a couple of emotional accents in the middle, an inspiring conclusion. I thought it would help hook not just the mind but the heart of the listeners. She returned the edits the next day. All the emotional components were ruthlessly crossed out. Red lines covered everything that went beyond dry facts and ironclad logic. Notes in the margins said, inappropriate sentimentality, this weakens the main argument, the client needs numbers, not poetry. I went to the kitchen where she was drinking tea. "Erin, why did you cut all that out?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "I think that's exactly what will make the presentation stand out." She looked at me over her cup. "Daniel, this is a business presentation, not a theatrical performance. Emotions are an unreliable factor. They can be misinterpreted. The client wants to see clear benefits, calculated risks, an understandable strategy. Everything else is noise. But people make decisions not just with logic." I couldn't help myself. "They're driven by feelings too. Trust, sympathy, inspiration. Which is why decisions based on feelings are often erroneous," she countered. "Our task is to minimize the role of this irrational component. You've always been prone to excessive emotionality, Daniel. It's your weak point in business." Excessive emotionality. Those words hung in the air like a verdict. In her world, my need for feelings, for warmth, for soulfulness was not a virtue, not a part of my personality, but a weakness, a flaw to be corrected or at least kept under control. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room in the dark, looking at the lights of Manhattan. And for the first time, clearly and without euphemisms, I asked myself, do I really want to spend the rest of my life like this? In this beautiful, quiet, flawless, and absolutely lifeless aquarium? With a woman for whom the very essence of my soul is a weak point. The answer came instantly and with frightening clarity, no. But how to say it? How to declare war not on a person, but on an entire system? How to explain that the very atmosphere of this home, this sterility, this polite, murderous rationality, is unbearable? I decided to act through logic, the only language she understood without distortion. The next morning at breakfast, I said, "Erin, I think we need help. A couples therapist." She put down the newspaper, looked at me. There was no surprise in her gaze, only analytical interest. "You believe our disagreements have reached a level requiring professional intervention?" "Yes. I believe we are in a state of chronic misunderstanding that is destroying our relationship. A therapist can help us either find a common language or understand that it doesn't exist." She nodded slowly. "A rational proposal. I agree. Let's find a specialist with a good reputation and scientifically based methods." We found a therapist on recommendation. His name was Irwin. He was a man in his 60s, with a gray beard and attentive, kind eyes. The first sessions were incredibly difficult. I tried to talk about my loneliness, my longing for emotional closeness, the feeling that I was living with a very competent but utterly alien person. Erin described our relationship in terms of efficiency. We successfully distribute household chores, our financial plan is 95% on track, we have no conflicts in making major life decisions. She complained about my unpredictability and tendency to make decisions based on momentary feelings. Irwin listened to us both very carefully. After a few joint sessions, he suggested individual meetings. At my individual session, he asked, "Daniel, please describe a moment in your relationship with Erin when you felt most connected to her. Not as a project partner, but as a close person." I thought for a long time. And I remembered not the honeymoon, but one incident about 2 years after the wedding. We went to the mountains for a weekend, and on the way back the alternator broke in our old car. We got stuck in some god-forsaken town in Pennsylvania. It was late autumn, cold. We found the only open diner, ate some suspicious chili, then spent the night in a shabby motel where you could hear the neighbors arguing through the thin walls. We lay on the hard bed under one blanket and laughed. Laughed at the absurdity of the situation, the terrible food, how I tried to fix the car with the wrong size wrench. We laughed until we cried, until our stomachs hurt. In that moment, there were no plans, schedules, goals. There was just us, two silly, freezing, happy people in a pickle. And I felt we were a team against the world. A real team. "And what happened afterward?" Irwin asked. "Then we returned to New York. Found a good mechanic, fixed the car, and dove back into our normal life. And that moment, it dissolved. As if it never happened." Irwin nodded. "You're describing spontaneity and shared vulnerability. Two components that are almost entirely absent in your current relationship, if I understand correctly. You both, especially Erin, have built a very solid, safe system. But the system has become too airtight. There's no room for air, for chance. And without that, any living connection suffocates." Meanwhile, at her individual session, Erin, as Irwin later told me with her permission, finally broke through the dam. Not with tears, but with words. It turned out, behind her flawless facade hid no less terror. She admitted that working with texts, with logic, with facts was her way of controlling a world that had seemed chaotic and frightening in childhood. Her parents, successful lawyers, were emotionally cold and demanded flawless results in everything. She learned to shut off feelings because they interfered with clear thinking and action. She was afraid that if she showed her weakness, her confusion, her need for simple human support, she would disappoint me, the man who, she thought, valued her precisely for her strength, rationality, and control. She thought the best way to be a good wife was to be a perfectly functioning partner who didn't create extra problems. She trapped herself. To be worthy of love, you must be strong. To be strong, you must suppress emotions. The result, emotional paralysis. Erwin brought us together for a final joint session. That day in his office, we saw each other for real, without masks or facades. Erin spoke, looking at the floor, her usually impeccable speech faltering. I didn't know how else, Daniel. I thought you valued me for that. For not being a hysteric, for not burdening you with my problems, for being able to handle everything myself. I thought that was love, not being a burden. And what you call warmth, to me, it was synonymous with weakness. And I was afraid to be weak. Because the weak aren't loved. They're abandoned. I looked at her, and for the first time in many years my eyes filled with tears, not from resentment or anger, but from pity. Pity for her, for myself, for both of us. We were two wounded people who tried so hard not to hurt each other that we ended up killing all possibility of joy in our relationship. I didn't want strength from you, Erin, I said quietly. I wanted you, the real you, with all your weaknesses, fears, doubts. I wanted to be the one you could show all that to. But you never opened the door. She nodded, not raising her eyes. I don't know how. I don't know where that door is. And I'm afraid there's nothing behind it. In that moment, we both understood the terrible truth. Our marriage was based on mutual projection. I saw in her the perfect, intelligent, calm life companion. She saw in me the stable, reliable man who would appreciate her rationality. We didn't fall in love with each other, but with images created in our heads. And when the images began to crumble, revealing the real people with their needs and traumas, it turned out these real people were absolutely incompatible in what was vitally important to them. Erwin summed it up gently but irrevocably. You're both good, worthy people. But you speak different emotional languages. Daniel needs empathy, the exchange of feelings, spontaneous closeness to feel connected. For Erin, comfort and safety are provided by structure, predictability, and rational interaction. You've tried for years to give each other what you know how. Daniel tried to bring emotions, Erin, order. But that's not what each of you needs. You are not meeting each other's key needs. And, it seems, you cannot, because these needs lie at the core of your personalities. Sometimes the healthiest and most courageous thing two good people can do is acknowledge that they cannot make each other happy, and let go. We left Erwin's office, and the elevator was tomb silent. We were descending, and with each floor a strange, chilling calm grew in me. The verdict had been delivered. And it was just. At home, in our flawless living room, Erin was the first to break the silence. So we're incompatible. That's the diagnosis. There was no anger or sadness in her voice. Only a tired statement of fact, as if she'd read the disappointing results of another test. Yes, I said, looking out the window. It seems so. What shall we do? Her question sounded businesslike. I turned, looked into her eyes. I think we should part ways, Erin. Officially. She nodded. Not a tear. No trembling in her hands. Logical. If a system is not functioning as it should and is not repairable, it should be liquidated with minimal losses. I'll prepare a preliminary list of our assets and proposals for division by the weekend. And so, without tears, without shouts, almost without any display of feeling, the decision to dissolve our 12-year union was made. The most emotional moment for her came when she, already turning to go to her study, stopped and said, without looking at me, "It's a shame." We had good synergy in solving household matters. Her regret was for lost efficiency, not lost love. And in that phrase lay the entire tragicomic horror of our marriage. The divorce process was a mirror image of our marriage, impeccably organized, rational, and emotionless. We hired one mediator lawyer recommended by Erwin. The meetings resembled business negotiations. We made a complete inventory of all our property, the apartment, cars, furniture, appliances, books, even dishes and linens. We didn't argue about anything. We approached it with cold logic. Who needed what more? Who used what more? Who contributed more financially to the purchase? We were dividing resources, not things. Erin wanted the library, logical, she's an editor, and the collection of art porcelain inherited from her grandmother. I kept the sound system, my study suite, and all the camping gear. Everything else, furniture, household appliances, we valued and mentally split down the middle, agreeing to compensate for the difference when the apartment sold. We decided to sell the apartment. The market was good, we quickly found a buyer. The proceeds, after paying off the mortgage balance, were split exactly in half. No alimony was considered, we were both high-earning professionals. We told our parents together, inviting them to neutral ground, a quiet restaurant. My mom and dad were in shock. Mom cried. But why, son? You were such an ideal couple. You never fought. I could only hug her and say, "That's just it, Mom." We never fought. We never really lived, in a big way. Dad looked at me with sad understanding. He seemed to sense what I couldn't put into words. Erin's parents reacted with cold, polite reserve. Her father shook my hand and said, "Sorry it didn't work out. You're both reasonable people, I'm sure you'll find a decent resolution." Her mother just nodded, her face an impenetrable mask. I understood where Erin got her emotional landscape. Friends were divided. Some, especially those closer to me, later admitted they'd long felt an unhealthy sterility in our relationship. Others, especially Erin's colleagues, were genuinely surprised and considered our divorce inexplicable. The last month in the shared apartment was a time of strange, ghostly coexistence. We lived like roommates about to move out. Sometimes, over a shared dinner, habit was stronger than us. There were flashes of something resembling warmth. We recalled funny incidents from travels, mutual acquaintances. But it was like flipping through an album of someone else's photos. There was no sense that we were reliving it together. On the day I moved the last boxes to my new rented apartment in another part of Brooklyn, Erin came out to help me carry a few things to the truck. It was a cool autumn day. We stood on the sidewalk, looking at our former home. "Well then," she said, wrapping herself in a light coat. "Yeah," I replied. "Thank you for everything, Erin. Sincerely. Thank you too, Daniel. For all the years. And, I'm sorry." "For what?" I was surprised. "For not being able to be what you needed. It wasn't conscious. I just didn't know how." "I'm sorry too," I said, and it was true. "For not realizing it sooner. For trying to change you instead of accepting you. Or, leaving in time." She nodded. We didn't hug. We shook hands. A firm, dry, final handshake of business partners who had completed a joint project. And we parted ways. I got in the truck next to the driver and felt neither relief nor sharp pain. There was emptiness. But, unlike the suffocating emptiness of the marriage, this one was clean, neutral. Like a freshly whitewashed wall. No stains, no pictures. Just space that now belonged only to me. The first weeks alone I devoted to simple, almost animal rituals of settling in. I bought myself a chair Erin would never have approved of, a huge, battered, shapeless leather beanbag. Put it in the middle of the living room facing a large window. Bought cheap whiskey. Sat, and just sat, for hours, did nothing, didn't plan, didn't analyze, just existed in the silence that was no longer a punishment. It was mine. Then I started doing things that seemed unthinkable in my previous, scheduled life. I called an old friend from college, whom I'd fought with over politics 7 years earlier, and just said, "Hi. Missed you. Let's grab coffee sometime." He was surprised but agreed. We met, and it turned out the fight had been nonsense. I signed up for guitar lessons, even though, as Erin had remarked with a smirk more than once, I had tin ears and sausage fingers. My teacher, a hippie in his 50s, just laughed. "Dan, man, screw it. Just strum if it feels good. Music isn't an exam, it's a high." And I strummed. Badly, out of tune, but with immense pleasure. I stopped planning vacations 6 months ahead. One Friday evening, feeling a wave of melancholy, I went to an airline website, saw last-minute tickets to Reykjavik, bought them, threw warm clothes in a backpack, and flew out. Spent 3 days alone, wandering over frozen lava fields, swimming in the Blue Lagoon, talking to locals in bars. No museums from a list, no mandatory sites. Just me, the wind, and an incredible sense of freedom. I got a dog. Not a purebred, but a Labrador something mix from a shelter. A red, whole-body wagging, floppy-eared mutt I named Barney. He was a destroyer. Chewed shoes, barked at the mailman, shed on every surface. But his unconditional, irrational joy when I simply came home, his readiness to drop everything and go for a walk with me, his warm, heavy body pressed against me at night, all of it was the best therapy. He taught me to live here and now, to respond to immediate needs, his and mine, to love without conditions or analytical reports. I kept seeing my therapist, now alone. We worked not so much on the divorce as on me. Why had I endured so long? Why was I so afraid to admit I was unhappy in a perfect marriage? It turned out I was also a hostage to an image. The image of a successful man with a perfect wife and life. I was ashamed to shatter that picture so approved by my surroundings. I feared judgment, feared looking like a failure, ungrateful, making things complicated. I traded my own existential need for closeness for social approval and a false sense of security. Gradually, I began returning to life. Real life. Work became more interesting because I stopped being afraid to show emotion and intuition. I started proposing unconventional, risky solutions, and some brought incredible success. It turned out clients and partners value not only dry numbers but also spark, ideas, passion. I learned to cook not from gourmet cookbooks but by eye, improvising. Sometimes it was inedible, sometimes genius. I could have pizza for breakfast and ice cream for dinner, just because I felt like it. My life gained that very unpredictability that so irritated Aaron. And it made me happy. About a year passed. I was still alone, but I was no longer lonely. Loneliness is a state of the soul, not a marital status. I was alone, but my life was filled with meaning, even if small, simple. Barney's joy on a morning walk. The pleasure of finally playing a clean chord. The feeling of duty done after helping a friend move. The quiet happiness of reading a good book in my ugly chair. It was then I ran into Erin on the street. She was coming out of her office in Midtown. We both slowed down. "Daniel, hi," she said. She was wearing an elegant suit, looked wonderful, but softer somehow. Or maybe I imagined it. "Hi, Erin, how are you?" "Good. I moved to Manhattan, an apartment near work." "Convenient." "That's great. And how's life in general?" She thought for a second, as if sorting through a list of facts in her head. "I've started Ashtanga yoga. It's very disciplining for the mind and body. And I'm seeing someone." "Really?" I was genuinely happy for her. "Tell me about him." "He's a neurosurgeon. Very logical, focused, intelligent. We have a similar worldview. We're comfortable together." I couldn't help but smile. Of course, a neurosurgeon, a man who works with the most complex system in nature, the human brain. For whom order, precision, and rationality are not a philosophy but a professional necessity. They must understand each other perfectly. "I'm very happy for you, Erin." "Sincerely." "Thank you, Daniel. I'm also glad things are well with you." "Your dog?" "He's in the Facebook photos." "Yeah, that's Barney. He's an agent of chaos, but I adore him." She nodded, and the corners of her eyes crinkled slightly, traces of a smile that never fully formed. "I had to go. I have a conference call." "Take care, Daniel." "You too, Erin. All the best." We parted. I walked down the noisy street, filled not with a sense of loss but with a light, slightly sad clarity. We had both found our element. She, in a world of order and logic, with a man who spoke her language. I, in a world where there was room for the irrational, the spontaneous, the alive. We had spent 12 years trying to be someone we weren't. Now that journey was over. And finally, each of us could walk our own path. It's been 3 years since the divorce. In that time, I've had a lot to reconsider, a lot to experience, and I think I've finally begun to truly understand what happened. This understanding doesn't come all at once, but in fragments, like a puzzle put together slowly and often painfully. I'm still single, not in the sense of relationships. I've had brief romances, a few attempts to build something serious. But nothing has stuck yet. And I'm in no hurry. Because now I know the cost of a mistake. I don't want to fall into the trap of a perfect on paper couple again. I'm looking for something else. I'm looking for resonance. That very resonance of souls I once mistakenly took for intellectual compatibility with Erin. I've learned to listen not to the words, but to the music behind them. Not what a person says about books or politics, but how they laugh, how their eyes light up when they talk about something that truly excites them, how they react to another's pain or joy. I'm looking not for stability, but for aliveness. Not predictability, but the ability to surprise and be surprised. My life now is a mix of old and new. I still work in finance, but moved into a more creative, venture capital sphere where they value not only analytical mind but also intuition, willingness to take risks. I still have my rented apartment with a view not of Manhattan but of a quiet ivy-covered courtyard. Barney lives there, graying around the muzzle but not losing enthusiasm. The guitar stands in a corner, and I sometimes strum something simple. The beanbag chair fell apart long ago, and I bought a new one, just as ugly and comfortable. I travel alone a lot. It's my way of staying connected to myself. A week in a forest cabin without internet. A spontaneous trip to New Orleans to listen to jazz. A camping hike through national parks. On these trips, I'm not collecting experiences for social media. I'm seeking the silence inside myself that no longer frightens me. Sometimes a wave of sadness hits me. Not for Aaron, not for our marriage, but for the lost time. For those 12 years I could have lived differently, more fully, more consciously, more alive. But I try not to blame myself. I was young. I was in love with an image. I didn't know myself well enough. I was afraid. It's part of my journey. And perhaps without that experience, I wouldn't value the freedom and self-worth I have now. I maintain very limited but warm contact with Erin. Every few months we might exchange short emails. She talks about her work, new projects at the publishing house, sometimes about trips to scientific conferences with her neurosurgeon. His name is Robert. Her letters are still structured and logical, but there's a certain contentment in them. She's found her harbor, and I'm sincerely happy for her. In one of the last emails, she wrote that she and Robert were discussing adopting an older child. Statistically, chances of successful adaptation are higher if the child is past the infancy stage and possesses basic cognitive skills, she wrote. We are studying the matter. I smiled. Even the decision to become a parent she makes by studying statistics. But now it doesn't irritate me, just brings a gentle, kind smirk. She is who she is. And in her world with Robert, she's probably happy. So what have I taken from this experience? What lessons beyond those already voiced? Marriage isn't about finding someone who complements you, but about finding someone who understands you. You can complement skills. One cooks, the other fixes things. But you need to understand the soul. And if that understanding isn't there on a basic, intuitive level, everything else is just cohabitation. Compatibility of temperaments is more important than compatibility of interests. You can adore the same movies and music, but if one perceives the world through the lens of feelings and the other through the lens of logic, emotional starvation will eventually set in. Interests can change, temperament, almost never. Pay attention to how a person shows love. For Aaron, love was synonymous with reliability, rational support, not causing problems. For me, love is empathy, emotional response, shared feeling. We both showed love as we knew how, but it wasn't what the partner needed. This is called speaking different love languages, and if you don't realize this difference in time, you can feel unloved for years while your partner is sincerely convinced they're doing their best. Fear of conflict is poison. Aaron and I were so afraid of conflict, arguments, imperfection, that we preferred not to touch difficult topics at all. We kept quiet about dissatisfaction, suppressed resentments, avoided uncomfortable conversations. In the end, all these unspoken feelings turned into a thick layer of ice that froze any possibility for real closeness. Conflict isn't the end of a relationship. It's a chance to clarify boundaries, express needs, become closer. The absence of conflict is often not a sign of a perfect relationship, but a sign of its death. The most terrifying thing in a relationship isn't fights, but boredom. When you no longer look forward to the evening to see your partner. When you're not interested in what's on their mind. When their presence brings no joy, but is just a familiar background. Boredom is the quiet killer of love. It creeps up unnoticed and kills everything alive with its indifference. Sometimes love really isn't enough. I'm sure Aaron and I felt some form of love for each other, respect, attachment, habit. But that love wasn't enough to overcome the fundamental difference in our ways of being in the world. Love is a necessary but insufficient foundation. You also need compatibility at the level of basic emotional needs. Divorce isn't always a failure. Sometimes, it's healing. For us, divorce was a surgical operation to separate two organisms that had grown together incorrectly and were preventing each other from living. It was painful, scary, humiliating, socially. But it allowed us both to survive and, ultimately, to start living truly. Not every marriage is worth saving. Sometimes it deserves a dignified burial. Right now, sitting in my ugly chair watching Barney chase a squirrel in his sleep, I feel peace. Not serene, flat happiness, but a deep, hard-won peace of a man who has finally stopped lying to himself. Who has accepted his need for warmth, for emotions, for being a little childish, as part of his personality, not a flaw. I don't know if I'll ever meet a woman with whom I'll have that resonance. Maybe yes, maybe no, but I'm no longer afraid of being alone, because I've learned to be happy alone with myself. And that is perhaps the most important gift I took from my unsuccessful, quiet, infinitely sad marriage. I built myself a beautiful, sturdy, perfect cage, and spent years gathering the courage to open the door and step into freedom. Into freedom where it can be cold, lonely, and scary. But where the air is fresh, where the sun shines for real, and where I can finally breathe deeply. Thank you for listening. It's been a long story. But writing it has been cathartic. I hope reading it gave you something too. At least food for thought. If I had to summarize this entire story in one metaphor, I'd say this. Aaron and I were two beautiful, complex musical instruments. I am a cello, whose voice is born in the depth of wood and string vibrations, full of overtones, halftones, emotional nuances. Aaron is a perfectly tuned digital synthesizer. Her sound is flawless, precise, clean. It reproduces any note with mathematical accuracy. One could try to play a duet, but it would always be an interaction between a living, breathing sound and a flawless but lifeless simulation. True harmony between such different instruments is impossible. You can only imitate it, which is what we did for years. Now, with 3 years of distance, I see not only my mistakes but also how societal stereotypes pressure us, forcing us to cling to the illusion. From childhood we're taught that the most important thing in a relationship is to not fight, find compromises, have common goals. We're taught to value stability above happiness. We're frightened by divorce as a terrible failure, a stigma, the end of the world. And so millions of people, like us, sit for years in their beautiful, quiet, safe cages, slowly fading inside, afraid to take a step outside. Because outside is the unknown. And in the cage, there's at least meager but predictable food and a roof overhead. My marriage was exactly such a cage. It had everything for survival, but nothing for life. I'm not writing this to vilify Erin. She's a wonderful person in her universe. She found someone whose universe matches hers. I'm writing this for those who might be sitting in a similar cage right now, listening to a quiet voice inside that whispers, "Something's wrong here. I'm missing." If you hear that voice, don't drown it out. Don't chalk it up to a midlife crisis, exhaustion from routine, or everyone's like that. Talk to your partner. Talk honestly, even if it's scary. Say, "I'm lonely with you. I'm bored. I miss warmth." If the partner hears you and wants to change with you, there's a chance. If not, or if, as in our case, the problem lies in fundamental incompatibility, then find the courage. Courage not to endure for the sake of the kids, parents, social opinion. Courage to let go, to acknowledge that this path has been traveled, the lesson learned, and it's time to seek your own road. Divorcing Erin was the hardest and the rightest decision of my life. Hard, because it shattered my entire self-image as a good guy who sees things through. Right, because it saved me. Saved me from a slow spiritual death. Yes, afterward I had to learn to live again, pay bills alone, face judgment, go through periods of acute longing and doubt. But that was the price of freedom. And freedom, real, inner freedom to be oneself, is priceless. I'm not advocating for frivolous divorces. I'm advocating for honesty. First and foremost, honesty with yourself. Ask yourself simple questions. When I wake up in the morning, do I look forward to the day to spend it with my partner? Or do I wish they'd leave for work sooner? Do I share my silly thoughts, funny observations, little joys with my partner? Or have I long been filtering information, leaving only the important stuff? Do we laugh together? Really laugh, until we cry? Or have our smiles become polite and restrained? Do I like how my partner smells? Do I enjoy their accidental touch? Or do I no longer notice it, or even flinch sometimes? What do I feel when I think about us being together in 10, 20, 30 years? Anticipation, warmth, confidence? Or heaviness, boredom, mild panic? The answers can be frightening, but ignoring them means betraying yourself. My story didn't end with a classic happy ending. I didn't meet a new love, didn't start a family. But it ended with something more important, finding myself. I reclaimed my right to feel, to make mistakes, to be spontaneous, to be a little childish. I reclaimed my life. And now, at 42, I feel more alive than I did at 30 in the prime of my perfect marriage. Because back then I was an actor playing the role of a happy husband. Now I'm just Daniel, with my quirks, a guitar I can't really play, a destructive dog, a dislike for planning, and a love for unexpected rains. This is my life. Real, imperfect, sometimes lonely, but mine. And if you're reading this, sitting in your own quiet, flawless, but airless, cage, know this. There is a door. It's only locked from the inside. The key is in your hand. Turning it will be painful and scary. But beyond the door is life. Real life. Worth living. Thank you for being with me on this long journey of remembrance. Writing this has been cathartic. I hope reading it gave you something too. At least something to think about. Best wishes, Daniel and Barney, who just stole the last cookie from the table. The end.